Alrighty. So what I want to do is go through and talk about effective online teaching from the, not just from the basis of research. I'll talk about some research, but also get into practice. And I will use quotes from students, feedback from students as we go, because I think student voice really helps illuminate what's effective and what's not as well. As Elizabeth suggested, this is broken down into 3 sections. So this is just a quick overview of how I've broken it down. And that way we can pause after each bit and have some questions and answers. But this way you can also anticipate a little bit about what I'll be talking about. So we'll definitely have some time to talk about like how to make it interactive, how to deal with assessment strategies, how to humanize online learning, things like that. So. All right, so I'm going to dive right in. Overview of general insights from research. So first, what I want to do is start with just some language, because we tend to hear a lot of different terms get used, and folks who aren't familiar with this or new to this are like, well, you know, maybe you're hearing like the term individualized from a vendor, or, you know, somebody says something about self-paced or whatever, or asynchronous versus synchronous, and what does that mean? So I thought what I'd do is just use the research to help provide you some structure on language and terms and what they mean. I'm not going to go into all of these because it take me a lot of time just to go through the definitions. But I wanted to at least provide you this slide. You've got this slide with all the detail in it so that you can go back there and read it if you want to. So we'll primarily be focused on social online learning, which by that we mean it's class-paced and class-based rather than individual. This is really the most common about what we're talking about in higher ed. And what this really means is that students are in a class together. They're working together. There should be or is a high degree of interaction, you know, between the students and each other and with an instructor. And you can use a blend of asynchronous, synchronous, or both for that. There's also, you may hear terms like individualized or personalized or blended. Again, I've provided you some definitions here just so you can see the difference to help sort it out. Really, individualized means a learner goes through it individually at their own pace, whereas personalized really means that the learner is deciding what to go through. But we're going to focus on social online learning. These are the terms you may have heard. Sorry. Self-paced is associated with individualized, self-directed with personalized. So, okay, big findings from the research. First of all, I think it's important to highlight that there's not just a few studies on online. There are hundreds of studies. There are entire journals and handbooks of research dedicated to online research. I say this because right now I see articles every now and then saying, oh, what a great time to study online learning. Well, we've been doing it for 20 years now. And we have a lot of research, so much so that we actually now have 3 major meta-analyses and some additional smaller ones. I've cited those meta-analyses down here if that's of interest to anybody. But of course, a meta-analysis is going through looking at the general trends in the research. And these all look at hundreds of studies comparing online or distance to face-to-face. We've done so much comparison of online to face-to-face in the field at this point that we have both uncovered methodological issues with that approach and concluded as a research field that it's no longer really a valuable line of inquiry. So if anybody has questions about research, I can chat with you about what to do instead of comparing online to face-to-face. But what we have found from those studies is that, the Department of Ed meta-analysis also looked at blended. Basically what we have found is that students perform as well or slightly better than students in face-to-face classrooms. I think sometimes that comes as a surprise to folks, but as we start to unpack it, I think that'll be less surprising. Really what we found is that it's not the technology that matters, but the design. Another way to put this is that there's nothing magical about the computer, just like there's nothing magical about these four walls in my room that suddenly contribute to a great learning experience. It's all about what you do within the classroom or in your online environment that make it effective or less effective. What that also means is that if we know that we can deliver effective online instruction, then we can use online to increase access, increase flexibility. Sometimes online affords options or opportunities that the classroom does not. And we can offer these options or opportunities while holding learning outcomes constant or affording new outcomes as well. So a little bit about what those variables are. If it's not the technology, then what is it? This is a quick summary, and this is actually still very high level of the variables. So we know that, modality is a bit of a design decision, but this plays less of a role. I'll show you details on that. Pacing definitely plays a role in the effectiveness. The student to instructor ratio, how small or large is the class. Pedagogy, of course, focuses on, well, what strategies do you use? Lectures less effective. It has its place, let me be clear, but it's less effective than, say, problem-based learning or other strategies. Also, what role or presence the instructor has online. Same thing with the students. What type of synchronous or asynchronous communications are you using? And again, this one shakes out more to just choices that enable flexibility more than affecting learning outcomes. Feedback and the source of that. And then, of course, different roles and types of ways that you can use assessments. So I think you can start to see that it's hard to boil all of this down to just the technology itself. Rather, there are a myriad of design decisions that we make that influence the effectiveness of online or blended instruction. Just to add a little more messiness, if you will, in research terms, of course, we talk about messiness and how it's a very complex space to study. I wanted to give you a breakdown of all of the different variables. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I'm going to call out a few of these, but I wanted to at least present these to you because I think, this slide even is a slide where you could print it out and start circling things because these variables are also design options. So you could go through and say, oh, I really want to use assessment this way, or I'm thinking about how do I address the student role where I want them collaborating with peers. Or I want to give teacher feedback and peer feedback or something like that. So a few quick comments on this. In terms of modality, these are really just options and they depend largely on your learners and their needs and their characteristics. So for example, if you have folks who are, say, in a particular geographic region that's very defined and close enough in, blended may be effective. We have a wonderful blended program here at Curry in teacher supervision and administration that's focused in the state of Virginia. So the way that they run that program is they have some face-to-face meetings at different schools out in the state of Virginia, but then they also have online class sessions where they meet up as well. We also have a fully online program with students who are all across the US and all across the world. My own classes have students in Germany, South Korea, Colombia, as well as here in the States. And I've got students spread across the States. It's difficult to do blended in that regard. And so fully online better meets, those learner needs as well. So these aren't really, there's nothing in here that's better or worse. It's more about the decisions that you make in these other categories. Class-paced with some self-paced, and this may be like weekly where it's class-paced by the week, but within the week, students have flexibility on when they complete things. We know that tends to be much more flexible and much more effective for learners. Self-paced has its place and time, but there are challenges with that, and the research is very mixed on self-paced learning. Similar with student to instructor ratios, this may not surprise you. Smaller classes are more effective, larger classes are less effective. For pedagogy, some of these strategies or approaches are more effective. If you use expository, which I do use expository some, it's good to also mix it at least with some practice and exploration, you know, and if collaboration makes sense for your topic, to integrate that in. Where we're going to focus some of our time coming up is really the instructor role online and the student role online. In particular, how present and interactive is the instructor, and how present and interactive are students with each other. This turns out to be a significant factor in the effectiveness in online and blended. In terms of synchrony, you have options, but they're really co-equal in terms of effect on learning. Here, you really want to be thinking about your learners and their needs and how reasonable it is to require synchrony versus asynchronous, and we can chat about that if you want to. In terms of feedback, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on, say, practice as a pedagogy paired with feedback, especially from the instructor. So students may be putting something together, taking the content that they're learning and applying that, and then getting feedback so that they can revise and improve their work based on that. You can also build in feedback, of course, from peers. This helps with the social aspects of online learning in particular, helps learners feel like they're able to connect with their classmates and chat with them, learn from them, collaborate with them. And there's also quite a bit of emphasis on automated feedback, but I will just say the more that you automate feedback, the more that a class will feel like it's depersonalized. So there's a time and a place for that, and you can certainly balance and blend all of that. But the more that you emphasis on automated, the more satisfaction with online tends to go down in students. Same thing with assessment. Some of this is, or the role of assessment. Some of this can be automated. Some of this is more just from the instructor. You can use a mix of these together. Like, these aren't entirely independent. So there are a range of options that you can use. I've cited a great text on this. If you want to go out and get a good book on learning online that talks about like some of the research and strategies, this book by Means, Bacchia, and Murphy is actually the book that I use in my class on online instruction. So a little bit broader level, some other things that we've learned both from research and from practice. One of the myths is that students work in isolation. And what we find is that social and collaborative strategies are actually more common and more effective in online classes. Oftentimes I'll hear people say, oh, it's online means asynchronous, and those are not synonymous terms. It can be asynchronous. Usually that's best for adult learners, although we're starting to see some increased preferences for a little bit of synchronous integrated in, even for adult learners. When I talk with folks at like the K-12 levels or undergraduate education, typically some required synchronous is better, just to provide some structure, because we know that self-regulation is a key factor in a learner being an effective online learner. Students who struggle with self-regulation tend to struggle in online learning environments. So integrating more synchronous sessions actually helps learners who may not be as emotionally or intellectually developed yet and need some structure to help them with that self-regulation. Online, there's a perception that online and blended courses are less work. Often they are actually more work for the instructor to put together. I'm sure you're discovering this as you go. For the students, it should be equal effort. Sometimes we lose track of like how many readings we've assigned, things like that, and we've underestimated the amount of time it's really going to take a learner. So there actually tends to be more of a tendency in online courses to overpack them. But you know, we just want to stay sensitive to how to make sure we keep the workload equal for students. Another common belief that I think is perpetuated by some definite bad practices that exist is that online courses are mainly a bunch of readings or videos. They can be online content dumps, but these are not effective. Nor is it really education. I view this more as online content, not online learning. And so you may be providing some online content, but you also still need to be facilitating the learning going on around that content. And so there's still some critical decisions to make about content, like the selection of it, your sequencing, application of multimedia principles, which I'll mention today, but we won't get into too much depth. But all of that can feed in how to make this aspect of an online course effective. And instructors and students just need to learn new tools. I think you have learned that this is a myth, this spring in dealing with the response to COVID-19, that it's not simply about learning new tools, but rather you are also learning new pedagogies and new strategies, and that goes for both faculty and students. And that has implications for how we support faculty and students with any transitions to online, that it's not simply about making tools available or teaching tools, but we really do need to support the instruction, provide orientations for students, things like that. So in terms of quality takes time to build the course, time to evolve it and add it and modify it. In my experience, it takes faculty about 2 to 3 iterations to really get comfortable with an online course and feel like they're back in the driver's seat and they really have a strong sense of what they're doing with their course and how they're guiding it. And of course, it also takes time to deliver a quality experience. Those of us who teach online and face-to-face, here we regularly discuss here at Curry how we spend more time in our online courses providing feedback to students, responding to emails, things like that, than we do in our face-to-face classrooms. So we've even started to have a discussion here at Curry about revising like our faculty load definitions and our annual reports and things like that to reflect this increased time demand for faculty who teach online. It also requires some patience. You may need some patience with dips and evaluations. This is kind of more general because we know that as faculty start to experiment and innovate in their courses, sometimes things don't work as planned. Or you try something you thought was a great idea, or a tool just didn't work the way that you thought it would, and that can influence evaluations. And what we've tried to adopt our policies here at Curry on like faculty review and tenure and promotion so that we're not penalizing faculty who are trying to innovate and thus may experience a dip in evaluations. So it's good to be patient both with yourself and collectively. Also, patience with developing one's comfort and voice teaching online. I mean, even though this is my area and I've done this for a long time, it has taken me, years to really develop comfort with what is my voice? How do I really want to present myself to my students online? What are the things that I'm comfortable with as a teacher? Not just what, a vendor might be trying to sell me or what an instructional designer might suggest or what research might say, but where's my comfort space as well? And how do I ensure I set this up so that I'm supporting who I am as an educator and finding that space where I'm comfortable too. And then patience with transition periods for both faculty and students. This just goes back to what I was saying earlier, that this is a change process. In the words of one of my favorite change researchers, Jean Hall and Shirley Hord, they said change is a process, not an event. It takes time, and we go through different stages as we adopt something new. And when you're adopting online learning, you're adopting a very complex innovation. It's not a very simple innovation to adopt. So let me pause there. Like I said, that's kind of 30,000-foot view. of the research. I'm going to dig into specific ideas here in a little bit, but I want to pause for any questions or answers, well, questions and thoughts at this point.
So folks, if you want to type any questions you have into the chat box, I can relay them from there. And if not, I will draw from the list, although I feel like we haven't gotten to some of the stuff that's in the list yet, and I know you're heading there. So
that's what, that was my thought too. So
everyone's saying, well, several people have said everything's clear for me now. Everything's clear for me so far.
Oh yeah,
it's quite isolating. Yeah.
Yeah, I am definitely going to talk about that. In fact, it's interesting. I was just chatting with a whole group of folks yesterday online. I'm very active on Twitter about this. That there are two major, let's call them philosophies or paradigms, not let's call it, they are in online learning. One is really personalized learning or individualized, where it is very isolating, but there's a whole other body of research anchored in what we call community of inquiry. And it's really built around Bandura's theory of learning, that learning is a social endeavor. We learn best when we're learning in interaction with each others, and we are typically learning from other people, not just between ourselves and some content. And there are some great ideas and recommendations that come from that. So I will definitely get into that in just a little bit. Do you practice introductory classes for students? Oh, great. Yes. So what we do is, especially if you're talking about at the programmatic level, like if you're going to do a fully online program, it's best to start with one, an orientation for students online that is an online course itself that gets them used to the environment, gives them a very low stakes environment to practice the new tools, get to know people, interact together. And then two, what we did was we identified certain courses where those are typically the first touch points for students taking an online class in a program. And we've got certain introductory activities and things like that built into the class. In fact, I'm getting ready to launch my own summer online class. I teach one of those. We start with what I call week 0. It's not really the first week of classes, it's a week 0. And it's got introductions and a very brief orientation to the class itself and to online learning and expectations. And so all of that you can both bake into classes, as well as, you know, provide something for students that they can go through before classes get started.
Sounds like a common problem.
I totally understand.
Isolation.
Yes. On the question of isolation, I very much understand. I will say this before I think why don't I go ahead and move into the next section? But as I do that, I will say, I understand. I used to be a classroom teacher myself. And of course, for those of us who work in education, most of us really value those relationships with students, getting to build those relationships and getting to collaborate really with our students as well. If you talk with folks who have taught online for any number of years, not just, you know, spring 2020 during a pandemic, but if you talk with folks who have taught online for years, you will hear time and again, first of all, a surprise by folks of how interactive online can be if you plan for it and design for it to be that way. And frankly, for me, I feel like I actually get to know my students better individually and collectively in an online learning environment, because there are some intimacies that online affords that it's actually more difficult when you're in a classroom environment and you're looking at everybody versus in an online environment where I can have a lot more direct one-on-one conversations with students than I tend to have in a face-to-face classroom. So I don't want to suggest that online is better or face-to-face is better. We've definitely discovered that there are strengths to the classroom and there are strengths to online, and there are weaknesses to both. And I think that's the framework to have in mind as you go about this. But we can address the concerns about isolation and social issues. So I'm gonna jump into that.
Yeah, it looks like there are a lot of questions, Stephanie, about how you can encourage students to turn their cameras on. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
This is a big debate right now. This is a big debate, at least right now in the circles that I'm in, because there's a lot of concerns over requiring students to turn on cameras, in part because there are some students who intentionally chose to study face-to-face because their home environment or where they live is really not conducive to learning. And so there are some students who are really reticent to turn on their videos for a range of reasons. It's not just about they're not engaged in the learning. You know, we hear from students who are they're shamed about the backdrop. They're worried about what you might see going on behind them or in their environments. And so I think that this question is more complex than just yes or no. There's a lot of variables at play for learners and why they may or may not want to turn that on. I will say that when you have large groups like we have today, that's going to tend to promote more turning off of cameras. If you have smaller groups, again, going back to class size and ratio, if you have a smaller class size, that's going to tend to promote more turning on the camera, participating, things like that. So we know that class size plays a role in, you know, if you want higher engagement, you know, people turning on the cameras and actively speaking up, class size, smaller class sizes actually facilitates that more. What I do in some of my classes is rather than trying to have a whole class meeting, I will break it down into small group meetings where I meet in small groups with students. And that way, if it's just 4 or 5 of us or 7 or 8 of us, there's a lot more tendency for all of the students to turn things on. That does put a lot more time onto my plate for managing it. So pros and cons to strategies here. And I agree, it's very uncomfortable to speak to myself too. So I will say if I'm doing a lecture, I tend to record lectures so that students can watch that asynchronously. Typically for a lecture, unless you're going to be doing some activities or things like that, usually it's better to offload lectures to asynchronous and just record them, and then use your synchronous time really for meaningful engagement and activities. If you start thinking about how to break up your time that way, then you'll see much higher engagement in the synchronous portion of your class. Because really for a lecture, I mean, folks are just sitting and listening. They can do that on their own time. And that's, you know, something you can offload to recording. That would also help with some of the questions that you're asking.
Stephanie, before we move on, could I ask you, for those like me who didn't know what synchronous and asynchronous were, to maybe just define that very briefly, just in case anyone else doesn't know like me?
Sure. In fact, I think I had a whole slide to it, but I'll do it real quickly. So asynchronous just simply means not at the same time and not at the same place. Synchronous means you're not in the same place, but you are meeting at the same time. So it's really just a differentiation between, are you getting together at the same time like we are on Zoom today? This is synchronous. Versus, are you maybe sharing things in a Google Doc and working that way, or discussing things on a forum or through emails? Those are asynchronous communications because they're unbound from having to happen at a particular time.
Great, thank you.
Does that help? Okay. So many great questions now. Okay. How do you record your lectures? What applications do you use? So I use Camtasia. It's a little, that's not a free piece of software, but I like Camtasia because I find it has a really good blend between it being simple to use, but also having some nice features built into it for like editing. You know, the editing in there is very easy. If you record yourself longer, you can create it, you know, very easily. You can create little bookmarks so that you break a video into segments. I have a tendency to talk a long time, so I like that feature. It's got an audio captioning. feature in there as well. I see the point that Blackboard offers this option too. Yes, most LMSs now have a tool built in. We're in Canvas and we have the Studio tool. Blackboard has a great tool, big blue button. You could even do it, frankly, with Zoom. You just don't have great editing with that. But there are a lot of options out there for recording your lectures, including free software. Oftentimes, your university probably has something built into the LMS that would support that. So
we should probably move on to the next.
Yeah.
I think that was exactly the right amount of questions, everyone. Thank you.
That was great. Yes. And it's, sorry, I see somebody typing there. It's not Camtasia, it's Camtasia. Yeah, C-A-M. And I will tell, I don't know how to remove the annotation. So I don't know who wrote Camtasia, but if you can figure out how to remove that on the slides, that would be helpful, because I can't remove that myself. Otherwise, we're going to see Camtasia all throughout. So, okay, moving on. So I wanted to drill down. Let's go from 30,000 foot level, thank you, to let's say 10,000 foot level. 4 big ideas for designing effective online instruction. Organization. I actually, let me back up. I feel like there's a saying in real estate: location, location, location. And I feel like the saying for online is organization, organization, organization. We can add to that, but these should be like mantras for as you design. So I have a quote here from one of our students who, in taking her first online class with us, just said, "I was really impressed with the quality and the ability to come together as people, not just avatars or profile pictures. Thanks for facilitating such a great experience." So let's unpack what makes for such a great experience. First of all, we know from research, organization and structure matters. I am using student quotes here to bolster the point that when your class is organized and well structured, students notice that. They also notice when it is not organized and it is not structured. In face-to-face, we can get away with lack of structure or, you know, changing things up quite a bit, a lot more than we can in online. I can take the same class that I teach at face-to-face and online, and if I make a change mid-semester face-to-face, my students will just roll with me through that. If I make the same change in an online class, it causes so much stress and consternation in an online environment. Students also like for things to be very well laid out for them. So for online classes, like I have a table that just lays everything out. This week, I want you to read this. This is the assignment you will do. This is when it's due. And we will have a discussion or something like that. And I lay that out for week by week for the course so that the students get a very clear picture of what the expectations are. Online learners actually tend to do a much better job sitting down and reading the syllabus than face-to-face students. They will go through and carefully identify, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to have? And they'll even put it on a calendar so that they know exactly when things are coming up. That's part of their self-regulation. So the benefit is students who are self-regulated tend to be great online, but they also like for things to be very clearly laid out and organized for them so that they can regulate their lives and their schedules. To the point of student feedback, like I said, I'm not going to go through and read these quotes, but students will, you will hear from students if the class is organized or if the class is disorganized. And this continually makes a big difference, both in terms of their learning and in terms of their satisfaction with the experience. So like I said, organization, organization, organization. And also part of this is communication, communication, communication. There's a lot of things in face-to-face learning where we rely on implicit communications. With online, you have to start making a lot more of those communications more explicit and more frequent, you know, consciously sending out emails or posting announcements or things like that to communicate things that you might otherwise handle a lot more implicitly in the classroom. So engagement, let's talk about engagement and the idea of instructor presence and learner presence as well. These are just some quotes emphasizing from students, from the student perspective. When the professor is actively involved in the forums, it makes a huge difference. I'll start with that one. I do discussion forums for all of my classes every week, and I'm happy to talk about how to set those up. I don't like to just ask a general question that they could all give the same answer to. I like to get them thinking and putting things together and maybe even doing an activity. I also set aside time on my personal calendar. I go in at the start of every semester and set a recurring block of time every week to go into my classes and check on the forums and at least have some degree of visibility and presence in those forums. It makes even 1 hour of time a week from you there can make a big difference in student perception. Hands down the best experience. Let's see, this one I pulled up because the student talks about providing excellent feedback and being actively involved in the forums. By the way, feedback from faculty is a form of engagement and presence in online classes. We don't tend to think about that in face-to-face because it tends to feel more evaluative. But in an online environment, anytime you're giving feedback to a student, you are creating presence with them and helping to build that relationship. So what I've learned over the years and what I've done is I've actually leaned into this idea a lot more so that now my courses are designed for a lot of opportunities for students to work on something, submit it to me, I provide feedback to them, turn it around to them, and then they keep working on their project as they go. So I use a more iterative and formative process with them that allows me a lot of opportunities to give them feedback, and that helps create very strong presence and really helps build relationships. The student said, I've been very impressed with the level of interaction I've experienced with fellow students and the professors. Make sure that it's positive. I've been blown away by the sheer amount of time they have to spend giving feedback, hosting live classes, interacting on forums, and dealing with emails. I didn't expect to have such fantastic interactions. I think that student captured it in a nutshell, what our work looks like when we teach online. We're spending our time giving feedback on assignments, whether those are graded or ungraded, hosting live sessions, interacting on forums, and also responding to emails. Those are the 4 big areas where instructors interact. And if you are investing more time there, students are going to notice. And that's what helps to decrease that sense of distance and isolation. So one of the big topics of research in online learning is this idea of types of interaction. And I think if you leave with nothing else today, this is the one. Because I think there are 3 quick ideas that you can use to design your online classes or even your blended classes. And they will help both with learning and with satisfaction and building those relationships. So in looking at what makes online learning effective, and what I've cited down here is actually a meta-analysis. Again, we've had a lot of studies around this, enough to warrant a meta-analysis. But Michael Moore was a researcher who kicked this off, looking at different types of interaction in an online course, and he identified learner to content, learner to instructor, learner to learner, and learner to instructor. These are key. At first, we thought of these as, each of these types of interactions impacting learning outcomes. But what we've really discovered, a nice little structural equation model here, is that learner to learner and learner to instructor interactions really facilitate your learner engagement with the content, with what it is that you're trying to teach them. And then that's what contributes to learning outcomes. So real quick, let me just give you some ideas around each of these and how to facilitate them. For learner to learner, of course, we've talked about discussions and forums. Group work is a great way to facilitate learner to learner. And that doesn't have to be formal, like a group project. I teach a class on instructional design, so it's a very design-oriented class with a studio-based model. I put students in groups, even though they're working on individual projects, but I have them work in a smaller group throughout the class, throughout the semester. And there are dedicated discussion forums where I have them sharing their drafts with each other and providing peer review and feedback to each other. So that's a blend of this peer feedback and some group work and some discussions kind of all coming together for a strategy that really supports some learner-to-learner interactions. I put this term back channel in here too, because this is a really important point. Back channeling refers to when students are chatting with each other while a class is going on. So in your face-to-face classrooms, this might look like, well, looks a number of ways. Like, hey, are you going to this party or whatever? But what we have found is that 75% of that back channeling is actually in some way related to or supportive of the learning process. So yeah, there's some social chatter going on there, but there's also a lot of learning chatter going on there. And so that might take the form of like a student leaning to another student and saying, I didn't understand what she just said. Like, did you understand that? And the other student explaining to that student, oh yeah, here's what I thought that meant. That back channeling turns out to be incredibly important to student learning. So in an online environment, we want to support that for the students as well. That could mean anything from like the chat room during a live session, allowing them, supporting them and chatting with each other, asking questions, being able to chat back and forth. More importantly, like in an asynchronous, if it's not live, if it's non-live, do they have opportunities to connect with each other beyond just what's being presented to them, to chat with each other? So like what we do is we have a Zoom room that's just open 24/7, 365 for students that they can go to anytime. They can self-organize a group, just like they might self-organize a group to go to the library. And they can just hop in there, meet as a group. We've got discussion forums set up the same way so that students can just self-organize their own discussion forums. And then of course, we've also got tools in the LMS where they can see each other and see who's online at the moment they happen to be online and connect with another student that way. So there's a lot of ways you can facilitate that learner to learner. For learner to instructor, this starts to put a lot more emphasis on feedback, and in particular strategy focused feedback, using virtual office hours. I do weekly office hours. I do those on Sundays because that's usually when everybody's most flexible. Having some live sessions. And again, there's a lot of different ways you can go about a live session. Doesn't just have to be a lecture. Could be that you record your lectures and you use your live sessions for, like I call them design jams in my design class, where we meet in small groups and we share the work everybody's doing and we chat about it. Your responsiveness to forums, your responsiveness to emails, sending direct emails to students, all those things I talked about already. That all helps facilitate learner presence, instructor presence, and supports your interaction with the learners. Learner to content is really a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of the strategies. Lectures is one type of strategy, but if you use simulations, I taught a fully online class for undergraduate engineers where we did a very low-tech simulation around nuclear energy, using games, doing application like, okay, I don't want you to just read, I want you to produce something based on this, and I'm going to give you feedback on that. Those are all really great strategies to use. Just this past week, MIT, some folks there who are learning scientists put out a great resource that I want to make sure I've linked you to on the science of remote learning. It's grounded in research, but they did such a wonderful job talking about different strategies that you can use in your online courses. So that's a live link to the PDF that they've got posted on their website. So that way you can hop right to that from this presentation to get even more ideas around strategies for online learning. I'll double down on feedback just a little bit. I think I'll zip through this because I've already, it's easy, I should say, to pound the hammer on feedback. But feedback in online makes such a difference, in part because students don't feel like it's just evaluative, they feel like it's supportive. This is how you as an instructor are really providing direct support. So that's why I said, like in my own practices, when I started doubling down on feedback as an intentional strategy and figuring out how and where can I bake that into my class, that's when my own satisfaction with online teaching went up and my students' satisfaction went up as well. I will say these are not quotes. I don't think these are quotes from my class. I think these are quotes from other classes. But here at Curry, we do put a lot of emphasis on practice and feedback as a strategy in our online classes. And that pays off both in student learning and transfer of their learning to the work environment, as well as in student and instructor satisfaction with the online learning. Again, I'll zip through this just very quickly, but in particular, I want to make sure I focus on, just draw your attention to different types of feedback. We know that error-focused feedback is very demotivating for learners. You know, if you're just simply, you know, correcting things or telling them what they did wrong, learners will actually disengage. What you want to do is make that pivot to more strategy-focused feedback, like saying, okay, here's what you did well, keep doing that. Over here, let's talk about, you know, how you might, you know, this area needs attention. Here's how you might address that. So give them strategies for how they can improve. This really reflects, or may reflect for many of you, or, you know, it did for me, a change in your role as instructor. And we tend to see this come out in the research on faculty adopting online practices, that instead of spending your time delivering content, especially if you've recorded it, now your time gets shifted more into feedback and interactions with students. During your first or second iterations, you may be in real transition there because you're spending a lot of time recording things. But once a lot of that gets recorded, you may find that you can actually more easily make that pivot in online, or maybe even take it back into the classroom of saying, okay, watch this recording. I'm going to spend my time with you now on working through examples or giving you feedback on your work or things like that. So some of this really will allow for a shift in your role that allows you to get to know your learners better and support them more. And then I just mapped out some tools for that, but we've talked through that quite a bit already. Where'd my mouse go? Here we go. One more key idea for multimedia, and I teach an entire class on this, so I'm going to skim this in 2 minutes. But not just having stuff, but having like this one, you know, the students specifically mentioned audio over PowerPoints. There are ways to design your multimedia content that increases engagement and increases the learning gains from that. So let me just present this to you real quick. There are a whole suite of multimedia learning principles out there. If you search for that term, you'll find it in a heartbeat. I've also given you a great reference here, Clark and Mayer. It's the name of that book is E-Learning and the Science of Instruction, and it ticks through each of these principles and how to apply them in your classroom. I think that this is some of the most practical advice that research in our field has generated to date. Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I saw that. And the cool thing about this is even though we studied it in context of digital learning and digital materials, you really can apply these principles in any environment, whether you're online, face-to-face, or in class. In fact, I have a great article I have my students read in my class on it about how you can use PowerPoints and speaking, which is kind of more the image I've got up now, in your classroom-based instruction as well. The basic idea of multimedia learning principles, it's based on how humans process information, and in particular, how we process visual information and how we process auditory information. And based on an understanding of that, how do you design more effective materials? So here, multimedia really isn't about the technology. Multimedia really means more audio plus visual, and how do you blend those two together effectively? In short, what we want to know, or what we want to do, is offload visuals kind of like I have here on this slide, to the visual medium and offload words as much as possible, kind of like I'm doing right now, to the speaker or the recording portion. The more that we cram text into the visual medium, text goes through this fun little thing called the phonological loop in our brain, where it actually gets recoded as audio, and it can lead to all kinds of cognitive overload and things like that. So the more that we use visual channels are, for visual information, and audio channels for audio information, and combine those effectively, the more students can actually attend to things, remember what we said. There's, like I said, all kinds of great learning benefits from that. So this is an example or a visual just to help you visualize what it would look like in the classroom. Put your visuals here and your words here. And then if you're recording, oh, I forgot, segmenting, like using animations in PowerPoint to help segment and sequence is huge for helping learners break it down, especially if you have something very complex, because while you're talking, students will be like, okay, what is this and what is that? Like, they're not paying attention. They're trying to figure out how these things relate. But if you break it down and use animations or whatever to really sequence and segment that out, that helps them build a much better cognitive schema for that, to use a $10 EduSpeak word. If you're online, same thing here. You would still want visuals here and audio here. Okay, that was a lot. So let me pause for more questions and answers. I should have said questions and discussion.
That was really wonderful because I know something that people were really, really asking a lot of questions about was feedback. And I think that was super helpful in talking about some of the different kinds of feedback.
Yeah. Oh, Camilla, I'm reading your comment about learner-to-learner interaction and how important it is, especially in COVID. That is such a great point to underscore, because, I mean, in fact, I'm getting ready to write a book about social and emotional learning and how you do that online. And in times of crisis, it's actually more important to lean into that. So I think you're absolutely spot on that, students need to be able to connect with each other, collaborate with each other, even if it's just academic, that ability to connect with each other. And if you're facilitating that as an instructor, that makes a real difference, not just in their learning outcomes, but also emotionally for them, and in terms of their ability to cope with, a crisis or a pandemic or whatever's going on. So yes, students curse for teamwork. We see that a lot in the research. I think of that as like broccoli. I tend to like broccoli, but there are some things that we know are very effective that students just don't like. So they may prefer ice cream, but some broccoli is really good for them. So I think, a good summary of that body of research is that we know that learner preference actually does not equal learner performance. So there tends to be a really big gap between what learners prefer and what they actually learn from. So how do you encourage them switching microphones on and listen? Okay. That's great. So I've used different strategies for getting students to engage. If it's whole class, I will admit that's much harder, because what you're doing is you're asking a question and throwing it open to everybody out there. A really good strategy to use is to say, I'm going to ask you to answer this question, or I'm going to call on somebody to answer this question. Because what that does is suddenly everybody starts paying attention, because what if you call on them? Rather than saying, oh, Andrea, I want you to answer this question. Well, as soon as you do that, all the other students check out. So what you can do is say, I'm gonna call on somebody to help answer some questions here. I'm gonna call on different people for these questions. So here's the first question. Pose it give them time, make them all think about it, let them all be in fear that you're going to call on them, and then call on somebody to do that. And you could even do that a couple of times and say, okay, now I'm going to pose some questions, and without suggesting you're going to call on anybody. And you could then open it back up and say, you know, does anybody want to volunteer to share their thoughts on X or Y, so that you're not just singling out students at that point. Another good strategy to use, especially if class sizes are larger, I think as soon as you start going, you know, you've got 20 students or more, which is most classes, you might want to look at, Zoom has a feature for doing breakout rooms. So give students a question to discuss, send them out to breakout rooms to talk about that in their small groups, and tell them, I'm going to be going around from group to group to listen in on your conversation and provide you feedback on that. That way they know that they're expected to interact with each other, and it's a really good way to get some interaction built into your courses as well. One thing that we did in engineering, this was with undergraduates, and we had classes that would run, you know, like an hour and 15 minutes, is we'd have like about 20 minutes dedicated to lecture or direct instruction. Then we would pose a question or problem set that we wanted them to work on, break them into small groups, and then bring them, and they would work on that for 20 minutes. And then we would bring them back and spend the remaining time having each group share what they came up with, or questions or problems they ran into, or things like that. So actually, I see the question about math or mechanics. That example I just gave you about breaking it up into some direct instruction, breakout groups, and then bringing them back, that actually comes from a mechanical engineering professor who taught online, and still does, here for UVA, and how he structured his class. It was a much more mathematical class, of course. You know, well, some of it was mathematical because they're looking at, you know, various equations and material properties and things like that. And so I really thought the way that James Groves is his name, the way that he structured his class is a great example of how to do that effectively. He also would record not just lectures, but he would record himself working through problems and send that out to students and say, okay, this week we're going to be focused on, you know, these types of concepts and problems. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this, and I'm going to show you like a worked example here. He would record that and send that out. And then when students joined for the live session, he would say, okay, a little bit, you know, a little bit more than I want to cover. You should have gone through and watched this worked example. Now I'm going to have you work on examples while you're live here with me so that I can give you feedback on that. I'm going to have you do that in small groups, and maybe throw a really difficult one out to the whole class to see, like, you know, start doing some whole class problem solving on it. So I hope that helps generate some ideas specifically around like math and engineering content and all of that.
Can I build on that with a question that a few people submitted questions about this, Stephanie, and I don't know if this is like a subject of conversation because of the pandemic, but a few professors who teach science classes and who would normally be doing lab activities with their students are wondering, oh my God, what do I do now? What's the current thinking on that?
So it's interesting. I'm hoping to get some time this summer to actually put together a white paper on virtual labs. Because when I worked in engineering, we obviously worked with that because we were delivering a online undergraduate program, which by definition means we had to figure out how to do some labs. So let me kind of work on it or tackle this as like a continuum. There are some classes and labs where what we did was we used what's called a lab in a box solution. This is really easier with like electrical or mechanical labs, especially ones where students won't get hurt doing it on their own, which is safety considerations come in here. But Virginia Tech, just down the road from us, developed years ago this wonderful lab in a box where students can do a lot of like electrical and mechanical experiments in their own homes, you know, using these devices. So we took some of our labs and converted them to an approach where students would order that lab in a box, and then the faculty member would meet up with students via Zoom to have them actually do their lab demonstrations via Zoom. Or, in some cases, the student would record their lab, but then there would be live meeting opportunities with the faculty member or TA for a student to be able to ask questions and say, I'm really confused by X, or I don't know how to do Y. And then that way they could talk in real time, and somebody could help them problem solve in real time. So that's some labs. Some labs can be handled that way. Other labs, we developed simulations around that. And those simulations can run from very low tech to very complex. And of course, what we've found is that simulations allow students it afforded things that they weren't able to do in the physical environment. Like there were some environments that it's like, I can now take you inside the wreckage of, of an airliner, and we can do failure analysis in ways that I just can't do in the classroom or something like that. I will say, I don't think that the US is the leader on this, to be very frank. Europe is doing a lot more work on virtual labs and developing both simulations, as well as NASA put out a white paper years ago on something called the virtual glove box, where what learners are doing is they're virtually accessing a real environment and they're manipulating it and stuff. So I see a lot more of that development going on in Europe, to be very frank. And so there's a lot more good stuff in the literature over there. I'll give you one quick reference on that and then move on. One of my colleagues that I worked with when we were doing online engineering here, he was at TU Dortmund in Germany doing some of this work. He's actually now here at the University of Georgia. His name is Dominic May, M-A-Y. And Dominic's doing a lot of really interesting research and development in that space. So, and I think it's with a K instead of a C. So you might check out Dominic's work. I know all of that takes a lot more time than what you can do, though, in response to a pandemic, but just so you know, there are really interesting solutions and developments taking place in that space. That was a long answer. Oh, I see a question. Can you listen in on a breakout group without the students knowing? I don't think so. I don't think any of the tools, none of the tools that I have used for that would allow for that, to my knowledge. Now, I will say if students are engaged and they're interacting, I mean, you'll show up in the group, but sometimes they don't notice, that you've popped in. So sometimes, I'll pop in, and just like you would do with, if you were doing group exercises in your classroom, like, I might walk over to a group and just kind of stand there for a few minutes and listen to them. I'll do the same thing online, but I don't hide myself or try to hide myself from them. And I don't know that there's a way to actually do that. Okay.
We probably might want to move on to the next section if you're ready.
Yeah, okay. Great. All right, so I want to get to a few other considerations that I know we get a lot of questions about. I meant to edit that. We could, oh well. In particular, I'm going to focus on like authentic learning and assessment strategies. And I will try to cover this quickly, and leave time to really discuss assessment. So direct application, like I said, both in the engineering program I've talked about here and in our programs here at Curry and some of the others I've helped build, we've put a lot of emphasis on direct application, that students aren't just reading or listening and then, taking a quiz or an assessment, but that they are also directly engaged in application. Again, this is a strategy that helps both with learning as well as with the interaction and building relationships and things like that. So having students do direct application, and whatever that means in your domain, whether that's designing something and sharing that, working through a problem, using whatever formulas it is that you're focused on. You know, in education, taking these theories from learning and developing a instructional product or lesson plan or whatever. Direct application really is one of those high payoff strategies, both in online and in the class, frankly. This is just kind of good instruction. So, and here you can see like students talking about everything I'm learning is relevant. I want to underscore this idea of relevance and motivation. There's a wonderful theory of motivation called Keller's ARCs, A-R-C-S. And he just talks about how to use attention and relevance and some other concepts to design effective instruction to make it more motivating so that learners they're engaged, they actually want to speak up, they want to do something about that. So that may be something where, you know, you want to learn more about as well. Okay, assessment tends to be a biggie in online. So let me get into this. In assessment, we talk about different things that we assess. Usually, most conversation around assessment is talking about assessing knowledge. But really, in education, when we talk about assessment, we look at knowledge, reasoning, skills, products, and then dispositions. And breaking it down this way helps us think about what assessment strategies are really best suited to the type of learning it is that you want to assess. And oh, by the way, this comes from, let me type it over here, from Wiggins and McTeague.
Thank you for not making me
should have yeah, I was like, you're there. And they provide more detail as well. Okay, so knowledge, of course, is just facts and concepts. The best way to assess that kind of knowledge is with selected response. This is very typical. Multiple choice, fill in the blank, things like that. If you want to assess reasoning, and reasoning is more like what do students know and how do they work their way through solving a problem. For that, constructed response or extended response is more effective. That might be like an open-ended question, or you give them a problem to solve and see how they work it out. For skills, we're looking at, you know, can they use their knowledge and their reasoning to perform a task skillfully? If that's what you're assessing, then you would be doing more performance assessment or demonstrations, like labs. That's what makes labs kind of difficult. Really, we're wanting them to demonstrate a particular skill, not just tell us that they know something. Sometimes we then want students to go on and create products, like I talked about, like creating a design or creating, you know, I teach a class on online learning. I want students to actually build an online learning product that they can turn right around and use at work or in their school settings or whatever. So to do that, I have them produce a product and then I evaluate that product using a rubric. Dispositions is really more about attitudes. So this is more if you've got like affective objectives at play, and you're wanting to look at student attitudes or beliefs or feelings about something. For that, it's best assessed using personal communications, like having the students keep a journal, maybe interviewing students periodically, or, you know, having them submit things to you, or having them do some sort of reflective activity at the end of class or as you go throughout class or things like that. So I get a lot of questions about proctoring, and I'm sure a number of you probably have questions about proctoring. Proctoring really is focused on these types of assessments, and it tends to put a lot more emphasis on auto-graded assessments. And if you're using or looking at or considering adaptive learning systems, they're adaptive based on assessment at this level. There's a lot of debate around all of this right now, in part because some of the practices around proctoring, especially here in the US, and I see a lot of people who are like, oh, you should never use this, or you should only use this. I really am very agnostic on this because it really depends on what you're trying to assess and what your purposes are. Sometimes you've got tests that you're administering for certification or something. It's very important that those be carefully proctored. And I understand that. So we don't want to, throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. But there is a much broader range of options as well that you may want to consider that get more into what we call authentic assessment. And what I talked about here around like performance, assessment, demonstration, product, all of this, these are all examples of more authentic assessment that focus on students actually doing something that might be expected on the job or in real life, and they get feedback based on that. Quick comment, yes, you can do all of this online. At that point, it's once you know what type of assessment you want to do, it really then just becomes a matter of selecting what type of tool will help you facilitate that type of assessment. For anybody who are familiar with it or wondering how on earth this anchors, I overlaid Bloom's taxonomy at the top. And this is really, most of this is focused on cognitive learning and then a little bit of affective, just in case there's anybody in psychology or education wondering how this all maps or checking me. I provided you some more details on examples, but I'm not going to go into those in detail. I just wanted to provide you those examples for now. So, okay. Pause now for more questions and discussion. Okay, I'm going back through the questions. So I see the question about American students prefer to get positive feedback. No, we don't actually see that, at least in the research, that, believe it or not, learners actually prefer feedback that is evaluative. And when I say supportive, I don't mean positive, like you did a great job here, or you're so wonderful. What students really value is when you, the expert, tell them this, you're doing this part well, you're on the money here, and over here you're not doing this as well yet, and here are strategies or ideas or tools or techniques to use to improve what you're doing in that space. Students actually, they know when you're making that investment in them, or when you're just being critical, or when you're not making that investment or not. So it's very interesting. I mean, feedback has a very strong impact on learning outcomes and on application and transfer from the learning environment, the class, to the practice environment out in the real world. But it also has a huge impact on motivation for students. And what's really motivating for them is genuine feedback that they feel actually helps them improve and learn. So I hope that clarifies around that question.
Yeah, we just got a bunch of questions now coming in at the bottom about different kinds of exams and how to run them here.
Yeah. Think of exams oral written with the student's camera switched off. So if it makes sense for you to use oral exams, like language, let's say like in language instruction, oral exams make a big difference. And I know, like I was just dealing with this, my son's a senior studying French, and he did some recorded practice as well as some oral exams. And those are very effective, so I don't want to suggest you shouldn't do that. And B, can actually be, the students themselves actually want that practice opportunity as well. So it's a great form of assessment that not only tests what students know, but actually gives them more practice so they learn from it. In terms of whether or not the cameras are switched off, I think this is you knowing your students best. I with my learners, we tend to have the cameras switched on. And I will admit, we don't run into too many of those issues. But if you're getting concerns or questions from your students about cameras being switched on or off, I would tend towards being responsive to whatever those concerns are. I mean, especially if it's oral and what's important is what you're hearing, not what you're seeing. If you're in speech pathology though, and you're needing to see like what's going on with the mouth or something, obviously then video becomes essential. So a question around like cameras becomes very contextual, really based on like, you know, your content area, what it is that you're teaching, what your objectives are, what you're trying to assess. So it's hard to give a really black or white or a yes or no answer to that one. But I hope that helps you think through instructionally, like when you might do one approach versus a different approach. Yeah, Barbara Samber, I am seeing, and pardon me if I'm not saying your name correctly. We are seeing a lot of debate around your question about checking students' knowledge online without oppressive strategies. That has been a huge debate here, because we saw some instances where universities would require students to actually attach a camera to their shoulder. And really the big concern, I think, boils down to what message are you sending your students about how you view them and how much you trust them, and the nature, how that influences and shapes the learning community and the learning culture. So I think it's very hard to balance being concerned about relationships and interaction with your students and also wanting to suddenly be able to monitor every little detail of what they're doing. You end up inadvertently creating a culture of distrust, and that can break down culture quickly. So I think that's something to very carefully consider in the pros and cons of proctored exams. The ratio of feedback to feed for, oh, isn't that a great, what a great question. So I have over the years tended to do a lot more in design language. We just call it formative feedback, you know, or in education speak, we call it formative evaluation, which would really be more of that feed forward, where I like to give students on average 4 to 5 touch points across the semester, where they're submitting, you know, rather than doing one big thing due at the end, they're submitting it in phases along the way. And I give them feedback on the work that's been done, but also, okay, looking ahead based on what I'm seeing here and knowing what's coming up, here's some additional feedback, you know, or thought or ideas for you going forward. So I would say I end up probably giving about 50-50 of both types of feedback, but that's the only way to really provide the feed forward is to break things up and intentionally integrate that back in through your class so that you have opportunities to provide that to students and they have an opportunity to actually act on that and apply the feedback to them that you're giving them. Sometimes, yes, it is. Barbara, I agree. Yes, okay. Distance learning, mandatory method or voluntary? I don't know that I understand that question enough. Are there other questions that, or more elaboration on that one that would help me? I do see the question on is negative feedback demotivate? Yes. It turns out what negative feedback, if it's you're doing this wrong, what we call error focused feedback, that demotivates. If it's negative, quote unquote, in terms of this section wasn't as effective as it could be, here are ways to improve that, that is not demotivating. So I hope that clears up the difference. there's some great books out there too on feedback coming out of, oh gosh, now I'm blanking. I don't remember if it's Harvard or MIT, but one of the books is called Thank You for the Feedback, or Thanks for the Feedback. It's a really good book on thinking through how to give effective feedback. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay, so got it. Okay, so I get asked that question a lot about, are universities going to go to wholly online or something like that? And I'm zooming out to zoom in to answer your question. I really view online learning as an option. If we think about education as an ecosystem, like an ecological ecosystem that has all different species in it. Within education, we have face-to-face, online, and blended as kind of three big species in the ecosystem. And we need all of those options in there because they all work differently or better for different learners. They help us meet diverse needs of learners in ways that one or the other cannot. So for some learners, especially undergraduates, face-to-face learning is, that's important. There's an experience that's there that they would not get online. If they can do that, great. But there are a lot of learners who don't have access to that, who are never going to be able to come to a campus to study. And so online learning affords them an opportunity to access education in a way that they couldn't before. I don't think that means that we need to suddenly replace face-to-face learning. Just because there was a lot of bad stuff going on in spring 2020 with online doesn't mean we need to get rid of it either. We can do good stuff with it. But when you start taking a learner who wants to study face-to-face and you mandate that they be online, you will definitely have a decrease in learner engagement and learner satisfaction with that experience. There's just no two ways around that. So
if I can build off of Barbara's question to just one of the ones, and then maybe we can move on, but just one of the ones that people did ask quite a bit was just about motivation. Are there things that, given this situation where people are being forced to study online by the pandemic, are there things instructors can do to try to increase the motivation in that situation?
Yeah, so typically we address motivation through our instructional strategies. So if you are primarily using lecture, let's say, you might want to consider how you can integrate in more activities into your class where the learners aren't just showing up to listen, but they are, when they show up, they're expected to actually participate in some sort of activity or interaction in the classroom. That may be through discussions, that may be through giving them problems to work on or things like that. But it's very quickly, I want to expeditiously get to the point of it should be relevant to the students too. We know that if you're just covering something and they don't see the connection of it to their real lives or the jobs that they're going to go on to do, they are not motivated by it. And that's true whether we're talking about COVID or regular instruction. So one thing that I've seen a lot of folks talk about in terms of addressing motivation during COVID was you could turn the pandemic itself into a problem. Students are having to problem solve around that. And they want to, in their own lives. And so if you use your class as a vehicle to actually harness all of this energy that's going on in your students around real problems that they're trying to solve, that could both help you be responsive to their realities, which may be much more difficult in times of crisis, and also construct meaning that's a lot more relevant and a lot more meaningful and thus a lot more motivational for them. So identifying things for them to work on that either translate directly to practice or connect right to what they're experiencing and how they can leverage the body of knowledge in your discipline to help tackle that problem. those are some, you know, quick recommendations for how to get at motivation. See, any good books on motivation? I don't have one readily coming to mind. I have a bunch of articles coming to mind. So I tell you what I will do is I will do some quick digging after we're done and refresh my memory. And if I come up with a book, I will absolutely send that along to Elizabeth to share out with everybody. Okay.
I think you have one more section, a short section. Is that right, Stephanie?
Oh, yes, just very short.
All right.
Just including thoughts and comments that I think maybe you're catching the message as I went through today, that a lot of what makes online learning effective really is just simply effective instruction. And as we have sought to study online learning and better understand how to make it effective, what we've really learned is we can translate so much of that back into the classroom as well. And I'll leave you with this idea of affordances, because I think this is a very empowering idea for thinking about both classroom and online, that different mediums have different affordances. It's kind of like the difference between telling a story in film and telling a story in a novel. They're very different mediums and they allow you to do some very different things. Really, that's the difference between online and face-to-face. They both have wonderful possibilities and they also allow you to do some very different things. There are things you can do in the class that you cannot do online, and there are things you can do online that you cannot do in the classroom. Truly innovative developments occur when you design to take advantage of those online affordances, not just replicate the classroom. So like I talked about, like, you know, what are connecting with people who are in a different country and learning together, you know, doing a simulation or a game or something like that. And then I know there's a lot of chatter around blended as well. So I wanted to just end with a quick note that strong blended learning seeks to leverage the strengths of both classroom instruction and online instruction, not just online content or digital homework along with the classroom. So a few quick closing thoughts on that. I have included in here some resources for you in terms of like standards. I usually get questions around like what are standards for online or things like that. There's been a lot of that work done here in the States. Some of the ones that are open and freely available. I created this cornerstones for quality here at Curry. If you want that, email me or I can send it to Elizabeth and she can send that out. I've linked you to some open ones here. This one's from Cal State Chico, and this one's from Cal State Northridge. These are excellent rubrics that are grounded in research. There's some proprietary ones that your university might want to look at, but you have to be a member and they do cost money. And then Indiana University created a great website for continuity planning during COVID. So I wanted to give that a shout out in case you found some good resources there as well. And there's all my references. Okay, that is it. Thank you everybody so much for having me today. I'm happy to stay on and keep answering questions. I know it's late for you, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may still have. I do understand. I do understand it was not optional. I wish I could wave a wand and make it all so much better for you. Thank you so much. I hope it was very helpful.
Well, thank you everybody for coming and giving your evening hours. We really appreciate your dedication, and I know your students will as well. Stephanie, thank you so much to you as well. And again, to Dr. Koch for suggesting this session, and to our colleagues at the embassy and also in Washington, Amanda, for connecting us to you. Everybody, again, everything will be posted later this week on the Facebook link that I mentioned in the chat earlier. So everyone have a great night. Thank you so much and keep doing what you're doing. Take care, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.